I am happy to report that I'm making the first video since the return to my regular studio. I mean, you don't need me to tell you that. You can see that. It's obvious. That's where I am. I am so psyched. Basically, everything is back to normal, except that I did finally replace these twinkle lights before all the flooding happened. They don't work now. Again. So that's weird. And my Klingon mek'leth, that sword on the wall behind me, rusted, which is weird, because I didn't think Klingon metal was supposed to rust. I'm going to have to talk to my smith about that, but being a Klingon, he's going to take that as an affront to his honor. Maybe I'll just try a wire brush on it first. I don't really feel like dying yet. Otherwise, though, everything is back to normal, and I am really excited to be here again. It's way more comfortable than working in a random room on the ground floor of my house. That said, this actually gives me the chance to go back and redo the redo of a video that I had already kind of started to redo before I realized I was going to be able to make this final push towards getting my old office back together. I don't really have a proper thesis for this video. I have structured it out a little bit more than I did the first time when I tried to make it, but just kind of generally, I want to talk about something that I find really interesting so that I can talk about some storytelling devices and how I think they can be and can't be applied well. And primarily, I want to talk about, I want to make a medium for discussing the things out of a discussion about the recent Superman and Fantastic Four movies, and how remarkable I think it is that these movies were released at almost the same time. They competed with each other for a little while, and coincidentally, they did a lot of the same stuff. The goal of both of these movies was to establish a world that in universe is already well established prior to this. So it needed to create these worlds for us, for the viewer, while also making it believable that these worlds have existed for all of time for the people within them. And obviously that's how every fictional world works, right? But both of these were establishing their worlds in the context of other established fictional worlds that exist around them. Superman, it was the DCEU, which, while I didn't like it, was a relatively fleshed out, nihilistic superhero world. And for Fantastic Four, it was the MCU, which Fantastic Four exists in a parallel universe to, and their world is just as valid with just as much history as the main MCU, which is closer to our world. And they had to sell us on that, and sell us on the ways that it was different while making it believable. And they both did that by kind of just dropping us into the story, and then using those stories to establish the characters, both of which are ensemble groups of very important, very prolific, very old comic book superhero characters, with the main key difference being that all of the main characters in Superman, I'd count all of like Lex's people with more than like 1 or 2 speaking roles, and I'd count all the Daily Planet people with more than 1 or 2 speaking roles, so like Jimmy, probably. I'd count all of them as main characters. But there was really only one primary character, maybe 2 if you count Lois, because she got a lot to do too. And probably Lex too. Lex is probably close to importance with Superman. But maybe with the exception of them, the principal character in Superman is Superman, and everybody else supports him, whether they're a main character or a minor character. Even the Justice Gang are still just supporting to Superman. They are there to contrast Superman. Fantastic Four had a harder position, I think. They had to establish 4 main characters in the Fantastic Four and make them not just believable as characters and as people established in their world, but as a family with an established family dynamic that we can pick up on and contextualize with very little screen time devoted to it, because we have to catch on to it quick and then move into the story and progress with the story. It's all very complex, and the balance of it had to have been a nightmare to hit. And then both movies also had to sort of establish a future for their universes, a direction in which they're going to go. And I think the Fantastic Four movie had an easier job here. They just had to do like the normal Marvel thing where they hint at what story is coming next with their post-credit doom scene. And don't get me wrong, it was effective, and I love that they paid attention to set design and costume design when we jump forward a few years to that post-credit scene, and it's clear that we've moved from the 60s into the 70s. It looked great. That whole movie looked great. Whereas Superman just had to hint at threads that might carry into the future. We know that Lex is sent to Belle Reve. We know that Rick Flag is starting to become concerned that metahumans are going to take a more direct part in determining world affairs. We know that Supergirl is out there and she's not dealing with her problems particularly well. There may be something about that crack in dimensions that could come back at some point. Basically, because the new DCU is less pronounced, like from our perspective, it's new, and the MCU is old. The approach just had to be different. And I'm gonna swing right out the gate saying I liked Superman better. I liked both these movies. I liked Superman better. Superman had this whole message to it and it had politics to it that I think that stuff is sorely lacking in modern pop culture entertainment. Whereas Fantastic Four was just a family story with superpowers. It wasn't bad, don't get me wrong. I thought it was great. I loved the interactions between these characters. As much as I loved Clark and Lois in particular in Superman, and as great as I thought basically every character was, the interactions and the dynamics in Fantastic Four were better. They were better because not once did I doubt the authenticity of the familial dynamic between these four people. And I think Fantastic Four did a better job on establishing the backstory of their world than Superman did. Superman did that clever thing with the text at the beginning. There's going to be spoilers in this, by the way, in case you hadn't picked up on it yet. They did the Rule of Threes thing, where it's like 300 years ago metahumans appeared. 30 years ago, Superman was sent to Earth. 3 years ago, now grown, he announced himself as Superman. 3 weeks ago, he stopped Bravia from invading Jarhanpur. 3 hours ago, he was attacked by the Hammer. 3 minutes ago, he lost his first ever battle. And then, about 3 seconds later is when he crashes into the ice. And they even keep it going later when they're establishing his dynamic with Lois. And it's been 3 months since they started dating. That was all very clever. I liked that. But the way the Fantastic Four does it with an in-universe special presentation on them and their history, which was 4 years old, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, because it's Fantastic Four. That was the joke. And having it be clips from previous Fantastic Four adventures worked so much better. And there are some people saying, well, clearly at some point those adventures were meant to be fleshed out more. We were supposed to see more of them. And I do wish we had. But cutting it down into what we got was still incredibly clever and worked super well, because while we know Superman has encountered other threats before having to deal with this Lex Luthor plot, we don't see any of them. And I think if we had, it would have gone a long way towards helping Superman beat the allegations that he is weak in this universe. Except, I'm not entirely sure that it would, actually, the more I think about it, because of the main difference in how these stories handled their threats. In the Superman movie, Superman has dealt with threats before. One of the great things about that movie is, in establishing its world, it establishes very effectively, just through passive interaction from civilians, that giant monster attacks and supervillains and weird shit like that are so commonplace in this world that people don't even really react to it. So it's not as if we don't know that Superman has dealt with stuff before, but it's not like he's already dealt with like a Metallo or something, you know? This Lex Luthor thing with the Hammer of Bravia / Ultraman / Superman's dumber but stronger clone is the first Superman level threat he has had to deal with. Whereas the Fantastic Four have dealt with multiple Fantastic Four level threats prior to this thing with Galactus in their movie. And now we have them fighting Galactus in their first outing. But while these are both threats that demand the attention of their relative heroes, Lex Luthor at this point in the Superman storyline is still a guy. He's still a petty guy who he's kind of like Batman, in which he's powerful with prep time, and that's why he's such a big threat here. But it took a lot for him to be an actual genuine threat to the planet. Whereas Galactus arguably is a threat beyond the scope of the Fantastic Four. It's a threat that even a team as powerful and as competent as them has no business defeating on their own. It would be kind of like if the Superman movie opened with a montage of Superman besting Lex and defeating Metallo, and maybe throw Bizarro in there too, and then like Darkseid comes to Earth, and that's what this first movie's about. The scope of the threat in Fantastic Four was, in my opinion, too big for a first movie, even one in a lived-in universe. And you couple that with, like, you want to talk about heroes seeming weak, couple that with the fact that they did so little with the Four's powers. It was genuinely disappointing. Like, at one point, Galactus is stretching Reed, and he stretches him to like I don't know, like 20 feet or something, and he starts to like tear. That's absolutely absurd. Reed Richards is stretchy enough to stretch around an entire city. He is so able to control the shape of his body that he could like block an entire team of Avengers. He can make himself that durable and that large. Like hell, later on, he gets the ability to like stretch into the fourth dimension and interact with like time and shit. He's incredibly powerful, and unless that stress that we saw him under there was him trying to fight back against Galactus pulling him, and it was hurting him because he couldn't fight back, there is no reason why that should have been a strain on his body. The only character whose powers came close to resembling their comic counterparts here were Ben, because he's just big strong guy, and Sue, who is able to push Galactus back, and we are told that that is a big deal because it's Galactus, and frankly she should be a powerhouse on par with someone like Wanda or something, so that makes sense. And arguably Franklin too, because he brought her back to life. But that's where it kind of loses me. She died from that. That should not have killed her. And I get that they're probably setting these characters up to grow into their powers later and get stronger, but they really weren't, like, powers-wise, like intelligence-wise and skills-wise, they were all very impressive and competent and root-forable characters. But powers-wise, they felt kind of underwhelming. Like, even Galactus seemed weaker than he probably should have. Like, he was taking everything they threw at him, really. But he didn't really show off how strong he is either. And that's partially because there was something on Earth he wanted. So he couldn't just, like, wipe the planet. But he could have just, like, wiped the planet. And there's really no indication that he himself has that level of strength. It's more portrayed as his ship being able to do that much. And I just wonder if they just didn't really have time to get into all that, or greater displays of the Force powers would have been in the extended scenes of those montage scenes at the beginning. Which I guess is another thing this movie has in common with Superman. Superman, as I mentioned, is also facing allegations of making its main character seem weak. But I don't really see how. I thought it did a great job of establishing just how powerful Superman was. Like, clearly, he's also an early career Superman. He hasn't grown into his full power yet either. But, like, Lex, while dealing with him, seems to think he can still suffocate. Whereas, clearly, he doesn't when they thought he would. And, like, when he really locks in, he's taking punches from Ultraman without flinching. While he's got that goop on him and he's flying up into the air. And even the most comparable action sequence to all the Galactus stuff, the battle with the Kaiju, it's clear that if Superman wasn't trying to keep it alive because he recognizes it's just a scared animal in an unfamiliar environment and that it doesn't deserve to die for that, but if he hadn't been trying to keep it alive, he could have just laid it out with one punch and killed it. Or flown right through it. But he was ramping up his attacks on it, trying to gauge how much damage it could take before he was risking its life so that he wouldn't kill it. Nothing it does to him is a threat. The only reason he couldn't hold up its foot forever is because the ground was giving out under his feet. He shook off its flame attacks. It couldn't even touch him because it was too slow to land a hit. And Ultraman, after he started fighting for himself and not taking direction from Lex, Supes was able to put him down pretty much immediately too. He was incredibly powerful here. The only things that held him back were either an extremely over-prepared, obsessive stalker enemy, a guy who has his exact same powers, and Superman's own ethical considerations. And that's exactly how Superman should be. And Kryptonite too, I guess, but always Kryptonite, you know what I mean. I've also seen people complaining a little bit that Fantastic Four's world doesn't feel as well realized as Superman's. And I do agree with that. We get a lot of establishing stuff in it. We know Subterranea exists. We know the Future Foundation is basically the UN of their world, and they've brought peace. And we do see people start to become skeptical of the Four before they're kind of talked down later on and brought together to counter the threat of Galactus. Like, those are all good things, but they're not... Very little of it hits on, like, a personal level. There's no Lex's minions showing how all this superhero, supervillain stuff is so commonplace that you can just get a job being a supervillain henchman in this world and it's like a normal thing. There's no shots of people eating, like, ice cream in the streets, watching a giant monster attack. Even the existence of Lord Tech and the Justice Gang as, like, an opposing thematic superhero group to Superman does so much for building a contrast between political forces in this world. The scene at the Roundtable in the Pentagon talking about Superman did so much. There's nothing equivalent to that in Fantastic Four. People just trust them, and the only one time they don't, Sue talks to them, but because, like, in their heart of hearts, they want to trust her because they have for so long, they go back to trusting her. And I do agree, actually, that Fantastic Four is a little weaker in that department, but I don't think either of them are bad. I think both of them establish the aspects of their worlds that need to be established for the stories to work, and they just don't really spend time on the aspects that aren't needed yet. And like I mentioned, I don't really have a thesis to all this. I just think it's worth talking about. It's worth thinking about these movies that are so similar in premise, and they're so similar in execution, and yet there was so much room for the execution to yet still be different. It just really speaks to the possibilities inherent to storytelling. I like both of these movies a lot. I think if future stories in their universes follow their lead in, like, quality and care, we're in for some really great superhero stories going forward. I liked one of them better, but I don't think either one is inherently better than the other one. I think it really comes down to what you want more in a story like this, really, which one you would like the best. If you haven't checked them both out, and you watch my content, and therefore probably like the same things I do, why haven't you watched them yet? I'm pretty sure they're both online. Is Fantastic Four online yet? Like, Superman's been streaming for a while because Peacemaker Season 2, like, directly addresses it and they didn't want to spoil anybody. But yeah, check them out. And if you guys have seen them, I'm really curious as to what you guys think about how some of these similar storytelling devices were used in different and sometimes contrasting ways to tell these two stories. So I mostly because of the coincidence of it. I just find the whole thing fascinating. And I really hope, because like the reception to Fantastic Four was pretty good, right? I really hope that we get enough more with these characters going forward, that we get to delve a little bit into some of the crazy aspects of their powers from the comics. Because I've read very few Fantastic Four stories in the grand scope of all of them. But of the ones I've read, they get up to some crazy stuff. All that said, though, apologies for this being kind of rambly. Hopefully you guys were able to follow what I was trying to cook up here. But let's talk about this stuff in the comment section down below. In the meantime, though, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later. But and I do mean that this time, because I'm back in my space now. You'll start getting more regular and more traditional content from me soon.